I had someone in med school used to get from a big lecture. He had an air horn, like they have at soccer games. And when the time came, he'd hit the air horn, and we learned to stop talking quickly. Anyway, one of my old professors said, what you do is you get in front of the class and you wait till it calms down. And there's always one person talking at the end. And you have everybody looking. And it starts the class off in the right spot. Anyway, welcome to week 2. We're a little bit more manageable number now. Class is close to being closed. If you're on the wait list, you may get in, you may not. Really kind of out of my control. We're going to cover a bunch of things today, go pretty quickly. We're going to get kind of a little deeper into the nitty-gritty about what you actually do to start your company in an entrepreneurship way. We're going to start touching on biotech gradually. This is, I mentioned in the preamble of the course, this is more of a course in entrepreneurship and less about biotechnology. So we will be getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of science, but it's much more aimed at people with the science of engineering vocabulary trying to start companies rather than business people trying to learn about the biotech industry. So we're going to really go back to the very, very beginning after you decided, okay, we're going to start a company, and what are the steps that you take? How do you organize all your work when you've made that decision? We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of pitching, which, as we said last week, there is a best practices way of doing that. It's not just free form, although it can seem like that. And we're going to get into some of the kind of arcane issues of how you legally categorize your company. It's not the most exciting topic in the world, but if you don't do it, you're like shooting yourself in the foot every possible way. So it's just a kind of basic vocabulary, and we're going to provide a framework for that. Just some housekeeping. Here I am changing slides without having the slides projected. That's very smart. We'll start taking attendance next week. Again, we talked about why we take attendance here. Entrepreneurship is more than anything an exercise in showing up all the time. And the way this class is done, you're given so much latitude as your own information gathering outside the classroom. I want to make sure that you're here for it. Great stuff. Our first guest speaker is next week. A guy named Chip Clark. He's the CEO of an immuno-oncology company called Genesia up in Boston. Fabulous, amazing guy. Sadly, it'll be remote, so he'll be 2D on the screen, but I think you'll get a lot out of him. I would recommend that you look him up in advance of the class, so you have a little bit of context as to who he is. And really the focus is going to be on how he got from sitting in one of these chairs to being where he is now. And I think that you'll get a lot out of it. Skip over a couple of things. I want to give you some resources. If you're going to delve into this industry, you need sources of good data, good information. I mentioned a couple of podcasts before. Luke Timmerman is a incredibly knowledgeable journalist, independent journalist. He publishes something called the Timmerman Report. He puts out a podcast called The Long Run. Look up the one with Beam Therapeutics. I gave you the link in the email last week. Fabulous story. The CEO went from being an English major focused on poetry at a little obscure liberal arts college in New Haven, Connecticut, you may have heard of. He's now CEO of an extremely advanced base editing company, very much at the forefront of biotech. His journey is fascinating, and Luke has a great way of pulling people's stories out. Remember our rule about understanding an industry and understanding your company by knowing where the prices come from. Pricing in healthcare is one of the most screwed up things anywhere in the economy, particularly in the United States. It's a woman named Libby Rosenthal, who I got to know when we were both residents at New York Hospital. She worked in the ER, me covering OBGYN. She went on to become a writer for the New York Times, covered China, covered global warming, covered healthcare. She's now doing work on pricing from healthcare. She wrote an incredible book called An American Sickness. Holly Tecco is an entrepreneur who has a podcast, Interviewed Living. It is well worth an hour listening to these podcasts. This is great, great stuff. I walk to work every day. It's about 3 miles. I listen to podcasts. I learn so much from it, and I recommend them highly. And your browsers, if you have a biotech area on your browser that you want to look at things each day, see what's going on in the industry, Stat News came out of Boston Globe. It's a very, very focused on the industry itself. We've had 3 writers from Stat News here speaking in class. They know everything about the industry, about what's happening. They're really good writers and they're really funny. So the readout is terrific. Every day you can sign up, get their newsletter. They do something called the Read Out Loud, which is their podcast. It's only about 40 minutes. It drops every Thursday afternoon. There's a publication called Endpoints, one of the industry publications, endpoints.com. Newsletter comes out every day. And for you chemistry people, and aren't we all chemistry people, there's a guy named Derek Lowe who writes a column on chemistry, biochemistry, and the biopharma industry for Scientific American. It is one of the finest pieces of writing in science journalism. The guy is brilliant, and he's a phenomenal writer. And if you're interested in this industry, you cannot not read it. So Derek Lowe, I've been trying to get him to speak in class for forever. He's from Arkansas originally. I just love to read his stuff, and one of these days I'll grab him in. Now, outside the industry, keep your ears open for interesting stories. Guys, it's when you start, there are the things you look at and the things you don't. And one of the things I found when I left the practice of medicine and was going back into company formation, you start thinking about, okay, well, what about other kind of companies? What about companies completely different from what I did? Where do they come from? Whose idea was it? How did they take that idea and put it into place? So I don't know if anybody actually read up on 16 Handles frozen yogurt and or Egghead software. When I write these things in an email to you for a class, it's not a suggestion, it's an assignment, okay? So we're all grown-ups. Most of you are end of undergraduate career or early in graduate career. You're here for a reason, okay? So delve into it. This is interesting stuff, it's fun stuff. And if you want to learn one industry in depth, learn how other industries work so you can figure them out. Did anybody have any thoughts on 16 Handles frozen yogurt? Okay. This a little later on, I may ask one of you to just pitch it. Has anybody been to 16 Handles? Okay, here are a few of you. When I first taught this class in 2011, frozen yogurt was all over the place. Like if you went for there's nothing. Frozen yogurt, who'd ever heard of it? And at the time, I had relatively young children. So finding sweet things that are cold was an important family thing. We do it a lot. And out of nowhere, these frozen yogurt places just started proliferating. Like some insect that comes along every 20 years. And there's frozen yogurt shops like every third or fourth block on Broadway. And they went through a very predictable but interesting evolution. And so if you've been to one, what's the genesis of it? What do you think the ideal was?
Self-serve with respect to the yogurt itself and also the toppings.
Okay, great. Self-serve is a big part of it. Anything else?
Very tangible, very hands-on. So
Very tangible, very consumer controlled.
yeah, colorful.
A variety of different flavors, not just your usual chocolate and vanilla.
Okay.
The price is usually by weight.
Okay. Correct. Prices by weight. Okay. The key is, the idea was, how do we make more money by selling sweet cold stuff than what's out there now? And for the reasons you gave, like you go to a typical ice cream place, you go up here to Haagen-Dazs, you know, Ben and Jerry's on 104th. Like I say, I live in the Upper West Side. I know where all the ice cream places are. And you got a long line of people. You got one or two people with really hypertrophied right or left arm, forearm muscles, scooping really hard ice cream out into cups for a set price. Okay? So for all the reasons you gave, for a given level of cold and sweet, here you walk into the store, you grab a cup, and the cups are like the size of small bathtubs. And what do? You put a little bit in? No, you put in way too much. So you say, okay, I'll try some of this, I'll try some of that. You pull the handle, the stuff comes out really fast. And then it's like, all right, well, I gotta make it more interesting. You put like some chocolate and stuff on it. Or if you're me, you put chocolate on it. And then you think, oh my, this is really unhealthy. So you kid yourself by throwing some fruit on top of it. And then it looks kind of, it doesn't look pretty enough, so you throw chocolate chips on top of that. You walk up to the cashier, who up to now has been no interaction with a human being. You stick it on the scale, it weighs like 24 pounds. You got $130 worth of ice cream there. You pay it and you walk out. So, per square foot,
And you punch the card.
you can punch a card, right?
You gotta
There's
punch that card.
employee loyalty, right?
Okay.
And customer loyalty. So, how many people are working there? Really one person behind the cash register, if even that. You know, I'm sure there's places we just kind of walk in and walk out, and it scans it scans that card. And then you've got somebody in the back keeping track of whether the things the machines are filled. So it's your labor costs are much lower. Your dollars per order are much higher. And the business kind of runs itself. So it sounds great. And the prices were pretty darn high. And I'm not a food expert in food marketing, but I would imagine that, like most things at point of care food consumption, the margins, and we'll get to what that means later on, the profit margin is very high. So, you know, everybody wanted into this business. Somebody does it, and then the next thing you know, there's one 3 blocks down from that. And did anybody read the pizza pricing article, the New York pizza pricing article? Okay. Well, the take home to me about the pizza pricing article was, you could have the best pizza in the world, and you could sell it in New York by the slice, and you're not going to get more than a couple bucks for it. Like, you could have pizza that cures cancer. You could have pizza that just like is an antidepressant. It does anything, and it's still going to have the same cost, because the way the market perceives things, a slice of pizza is a slice of pizza, and it's essentially a commodity. And the concept of figuring out what's a commodity and what's a premium good is the heart of a business plan. So what happened with the frozen yogurt? Suddenly, there's frozen yogurt everywhere. You don't have to walk the extra block to 16 handles. You can go to 18 handles next door, or whatever the different version of. And they just, they started dropping price, and they spread the customers out between them, because really, was their customer loyalty? Come on, frozen yogurt's frozen yogurt. And now, after a spurt of activity, a proliferation of frozen yogurt shops, they've cut back, and we have one sort of busy, dusty place on Broadway and whatever. And 16 handles is probably the last holdout. Now, 16 handles is going to become like Blockbuster Video. Anybody remember Blockbuster? You probably remember. You guys aren't that old. So it's an interesting case study as what the idea was, how it was implemented, deconstruct why it's an idea that worked, and why it's an idea that only worked for a while. Okay? Now, let's go to, I'll get to your questions in a minute. Let's go to Egghead Software. Has anyone here been to an Egghead Software? Okay. Has anyone been to a GameStop? Okay. Well, think of Egghead Software as the GameStop of 20 years ago. And when I bought my first computer in 1988, I was a senior resident, and I decided that I had about 25 spare minutes a week. to learn a new hobby, and learn a new hobby is going to be buying a computer. So I bought a computer, and the computer had a 10 megabyte hard drive. And the computer salesman said, I don't know how you're ever going to fill that up. 10 megabytes is like, it's like a book with a paragraph. So the computers were what they were. Computer probably cost a couple $1,000s. You know, this is like half of my residence salary back then. And the problem was getting software. Nowadays, you want software, you go online, most of it's free. You may pay $1.99, maybe this is a subscription model, $6 a year or something like that. And you've all used Microsoft Word. Okay. A copy of Microsoft Word retail in the early 1990s, I believe, was $599. If you wanted Excel, it was another $599. PowerPoint, once it was invented, it was another $599. So the prices were ridiculous. And there was no getting software online. Why is that? Because there was no online. Every computer was a little island. We weren't connected to each other. You know, we started getting in the mail CDs to join up with AOL, America Online, which was the forerunner, the first way that someone tried to put a face on the internet. But at the beginning, each computer was an island. So everything you had to do, you had your computer, you had your printer, which was another $900 or so for a dot matrix printer that made lots and lots of noise. And you had to peel away the perforations on the side of the paper at the end of it. And then you had to get your software. So where did you get your software? You would get it from retail dealers. So we talked about the little bookstores that were in all the malls and all the shopping centers. There were software stores the same way. And you'd go in and you would buy software packages. They may have 4 or 5 floppy disks, which were, you know, if you go back and you watch an 80s or 90s movie, you see them sliding these disks in and out of the computer. And that's where the data was. It got written to the hard drive, and you owned the program. Of course, there's all sorts of ways of making sure you didn't put it on more than one computer, because Microsoft wanted another $600 if, you know, your sister wanted to use it. So, and they put these in these enormous boxes. These big, you know, boxes were about this size, because it would be easy to steal the discs otherwise. And you would take it and you'd put it on the counter, and they'd ring it up. And that's how you bought software back. Now, what did Egghead Software do? They did a nice job of marketing. They had great brand recognition. Like, you know, none of you guys know Egghead Software. Everybody, my generation for the one after that, we all knew Egghead Software. I can still see the logo, which was a little nerdy egg, believe it or not. And they sold a ton of software. What happened, like with the book industry, the entire distribution system for software gradually changed. And going back to rule number 1, know where your price comes from. After a while, there were more choices per software than the price, you know, that huge margin could support. So for a while, you know, people didn't use Microsoft Word, they used something called WordPerfect. And then there was something called OmniPro, which was a graphical user interface word processor. There was Excel. Excel had to overcome the market dominance of something called Lotus 1-2-3, which was the first really good spreadsheet program. That's the one that made the IBM personal computer work. Presentation software didn't exist for a while. When I finished my medical training and I started going around giving lectures, you literally would have to draw out your slides or put them on a kind of drawing software, bring them to a graphics department, and they would print up physical slides for you. There's little squares, you've probably seen them in history books or something, and we would put them in carousels. So you'd have to, like, well, now I give a talk, like, I'm making my slides up 10 minutes before the talk. Back then, you had to do it like months in advance. And then you'd be flying to give your lecture, and you'd be like holding the slides up to the light and changing the order. It was a whole different world. So here, unlike 16 handles, which just, it failed ultimately because it was a assumption that you had a premium product that commanded a premium price, when in reality it was a commodity. Egghead software eventually disappeared because, yes, there was some price margin pressure because you didn't have one single solution for everything, word processing, spreadsheets, etc. But it was also just the distribution model made the same product easier to buy elsewhere. And the solution that you had, which was, brick and mortar stores, was no longer needed. Now, how does this have to do with biotech and science-based companies? Well, it's really the same thing. You've got to get down to, okay, what service am I providing? What need am I fulfilling? And how else can the consumer, the person suffering from that problem, have that problem fixed? You're not looking at it, it has to be very narrow. First-time entrepreneurs tend to think, okay, there's a linear relationship between the problem I'm solving and what I've done, and I fixed it. And the world will flock to me because of that. That happens sometimes. More often, it's a kind of a three-dimensional chessboard. There are lots and lots of different ways of solving the particular problem. And yours may or may not fit today, and you've got to do your best to figure out what's going to be in the future. There's a company years ago called Dendrion. Dendrion was one of the first immuno-oncology companies, and they attacked prostate cancer. And they went through, trench warfare to get their drug approved, and it was cumbersome because you had to, it was a biologic, based on the patient's own tissues and cells, so manufacturing was difficult, and it was a popular stock for a very, very long time, and a popular company, because the image of early immuno-oncology was great, and the vision was really compelling. Problem was, while they were doing that, they were, as is prone to biotech, in the midst of a very, very long product development cycle. A couple of other companies came along through using a completely different mechanism, developed small molecule drugs that worked at the level of the androgen or testosterone hormone-like receptor in the prostate, essentially disconnecting that receptor from its ability to be occupied by an androgen. And the way things worked out, they made Dendrion's drug completely irrelevant. So here you are, you've got this great idea, you've got this great science you want to apply. You go through the trench warfare of drug approval, clinical trials, preclinical work, clinical trials, regulatory, raising money, and then 2.5, 3 laps around a 4-lap race, they change the rules on you. They say, okay, this company is allowed to enter the race now, and they can enter it, you're running, they're on motorcycles. And it's the nature of the way these companies evolve. So when you're putting your business plan together, there's a tendency to be very static in your mind. Okay, here's where we are now. Here's where the problem is now. And not to give the amount of thought to where it's going. What's going to happen between now and the next time we either need to raise money or are ready to go to market? What's going to be different about the world? So we go back to egghead software and 16 handles. What the heck does this have to do with biotechnology? Nothing. Other than the fact that these are other examples for somebody seeing a market opportunity. I don't want to say they're solving a problem because 16 handles really solve a problem. That's it's entrepreneurship and solving problems. So they saw a market opportunity, they saw the need in the market, they had a really good idea, and then they asked, well, how long is this idea going to last? What are the risks? And how do we mitigate it? And you need to know this because you're at ground zero of committing 5, 10, 15, 20 years of your life to this idea. More importantly, or equally importantly, you got to convince other people this idea. And if you're not thinking about these questions, they're going to be asking them. So that's the whole purpose for having you look at these other seemingly unrelated companies. Okay, aspirin digitalis. Drug design and pharmaceuticals has evolved from very humble beginnings. You know, we were doing drug development and therapeutic use before we knew how to make pills and things of that sort. You know, there are plenty of things that came up out of hundreds and thousands of years of lore when we were living in set geographic areas, where people would do things like find a flower that was poisonous, or find a flower that if you ate it, it was easier to breathe if you got older. Or there's certain barks that you could ingest that had certain type of pain relieving qualities. And this was the earliest type of drug discovery. You know, those were the origins of what became aspirin and digitalis. And so it was a very storytelling, lore passed down from generations type of thing. You know, we talk about grabbing onto an industry when it's going from analog to digital. Well, this was the ultimate analog of drug development. And we're going to trace how we've gone from, you know, those kind of origins to, you know, the kind of super specified, you know, beam therapeutics we talked about before. They're doing single base changes. They're modifying DNA going after single bases. Incredibly precise. Important work. But it's good to have the spectrum, have the history in mind, because it's much easier to kind of tell the story of where you're going. Most importantly, convincing yourself it's worth doing, and also convincing the people you need to talk to. Okay, well that's 25 minutes on the first slide. We're going real fast here. Question?
Yeah, so going back to pizza pricing, how do you explain places like Joe's in the Village that charge like $3.25 for a slice that are like lines out the door?
Yeah, no, there's a certain amount of what we call price elasticity. If you're combination, you know, for a pizza place, it's a combination of setting, reputation, brand knowledge, and the fact that, let's face it, Joe's Pizza is a little bit better than, you know, Pizza X at Amsterdam in '96. You know? So there is some degree of it, but no one is ever going to get $10 for a slice of pizza if that's all they're selling. You know, maybe they're selling the setting in the restaurant, and maybe it's the appetizer part of everything else on the restaurant is $50. You know, who knows? But they're not selling that slice of pizza. People are not going to that restaurant for that slice of pizza and spending four times what you can get in, you know, something with the name Familia in it. You know, which is, let's be honest, that's pretty good pizza too. The great thing about pizza is even bad pizza is pretty good. So you're not going to be able to find that, you know, that super premium pricing. And you should always be thinking about justifying your pricing to yourself, because it's enormous to that.
I feel like we have to recognize like the elephant in the room that is COVID and the new reality. So the 16 handles, you know.
Okay, that's a little off topic.
Okay.
And I think that would take us a little away from where we're going, but you know, COVID affects everything right now. Okay, existential questions. Why study entrepreneurship? More existential question, what is entrepreneurship? Because remember we talked about precision in our language, precision in our understanding. So let's really vet what we mean here. Because if I asked every one of you, actually I did ask every one of you, when you gave me your email why you wanted to take the class, it was obvious to me that everyone had a different view of what entrepreneurship is. And for a lot of people, it's a bunch of impressions, a bunch of images. It's the terms, term sheet, venture capital, it's a couple of images of Shark Tank, there's the movie, the Social Network, you know, obvious stuff that you kind of pick up along the way. There's the stories of people just few months older than you guys that are worth billions of dollars because of a great idea they developed, and that's all fine. Those are all little glimpses of an enormous spectrum of things that could be called entrepreneurship. So the simplest answer is, you know, okay, entrepreneurship is starting a business. But I think that's a little too narrow. I had one group of students years ago that came up with, we used to have an exercise about this, they came up with it's bringing creativity to a business setting, which this idea I love. I'm not sure it's a great, strict means of describing it, but frankly, this is the way I look at entrepreneurship. entrepreneurship. It is problem solving. It is identifying a need in the marketplace, a problem that people are suffering from, and fixing it, coming up with a solution, but more importantly, taking that solution from an idea to a tangible benefit. That's the dual parts of the entrepreneurship. People tend to overemphasize the importance of the idea, as if the idea, once floated, will organically just descend upon the world and make the world a better place. That's nice, but the reality is it's a grinded out, blocking and tackling, step by step by step. Most of those steps are not all that exciting. It's a process by which you take that vision, you make it real. And that's what we're going to try to go here. One of the nice things about entrepreneurship, and actually one of the burdens of doing this, is that it's a freedom within a work and career context. You're making the decisions. You are your own boss. You have that element of freedom. And having been on both sides of the employee of a big organization to you're it, I've lived all parts of that spectrum. The you're it part is not necessarily always great. There are plenty of days and nights you wake up saying, oh, what did I do? What did I give up? What path did I not take? Who the hell did I think I was? There are plenty of what I call everything I know is wrong days, where you just start, questioning your own judgment. But that's okay. It's like you're in the fray. You guys have 50, 60, 70 years of career in front of you. There's an opportunity to be in many, many different situations. And I wouldn't tell you to shy away from being in this role of total authority and total responsibility. But on the same hand, go in with your eyes open. It's like, entrepreneurship is it's like a drug addiction. It doesn't take off weekends. You're always on the spot. You are always the person of last resort. And there's a great freedom to that, knowing that you don't have to rely on anybody else. It's also, there are plenty of times when it's like, you want to turn it off. So go in with your eyes open. Other aspect of being a company founder, being an entrepreneur, has to do with, we'll discuss negotiation later in the class. But, the negotiation, and there's a couple ground rules for negotiation. One of which, always try to position yourself from a position of strength. If you go in and you have no options, then it's not a negotiation, and don't mistake it for one. What's the best option? The best option for negotiation is being able to get up and walk away. Within life, within your working world, within your career, if in the back of your mind you always have one or two ideas that you've sketched out that at some point you'd like to pursue, de novo, make something happen your own. Every step of the way, when you're applying for jobs or you're in a position you don't like, you always have an option. There's a ceiling of freedom to being a kind of shadow entrepreneur in your own career. So it's one of the unpublished, unadvertised benefits of studying the concept of entrepreneurship, particularly when you possess a real proprietary vocabulary in a very subspecialized area of knowledge, as almost all of you do. Okay? So, a little bit about biotech. Why are we focusing on biotechnology? Reason number one is that department asked me to teach, so that's a good one. But even more so, biotech is a stress-tested version of a stress-tested process. In other words, biotech is entrepreneurship on steroids. If it's hard to start a restaurant, it's 100 times harder to start a biotech company. And believe me, it's not easy to start a restaurant. Friends who tried. Why is that? Well, single biggest area is the time between your idea and making money from your idea is the longest of any product development cycle anywhere in the economy, maybe with the exception of things like deep sea mining and stuff like that. When you're drilling miles and miles underneath the ocean. And the optionality is extremely high. you go through lots and lots of steps in developing a drug. You go from idea to earliest experiments. These earliest experiments typically done on cells. Then you move into experiments on animals. Then you move into experiments on people. And the experiments on people go from, am I killing anybody with this drug, to, am I helping anybody with this drug, to, can I convince the government that I'm helping people with this drug and I can charge a ridiculous amount of money for it. At every one of those steps, your company's value can go from whatever it is to zero. All you need is an unexpected toxicity to come up. All you need, as we saw with Dendreon, is a competitor to come up with a more convenient form that provides the same extension of life with a bad disease, and your valuation goes away. So it's a real tough, high returns, high risk, very long process. And each step of the process, your ability to assess what your value proposition is and to put a price tag, because a process like this requires accelerating amounts of money that you have to go out and raise. In order to raise money, you gotta be able to put a price tag on what you're doing. There's one or two of you out there that have studied finance, and you know that without inflows and outflows of cash, it's extremely difficult to put a price tag of some precision on what you're developing. So you add all these things up, the super high optionality, the very broad, imprecise way that we value these companies, as well as the unknownness of what we call science risk. You know, the ability to predict what's going to happen when you take a molecule that never existed in the world before. And okay, here's a great idea. Let's invent this molecule and circulate it through people's bodies and see what happens. What could go wrong? Well, a lot could go wrong. And any of those things that can go wrong could just shoot your project out. So you got high hurdle of difficulty, very technical, you know, a lot of skill. You've got a scorekeeper, i.e. the FDA, that has complete control over the ability of your process to progress. And the FDA is not a friendly partner most of the time. Yeah, the FDA has some pretty high standards. You've got that long need for funding, and as well, in the nuts and bolts of putting your company together, you have a shifting landscape of what goes on under your roof. So in the beginning, if you're a founder with a background in science, you may have a set of real major bench skills that are absolutely integral for what you're doing to get to that first proof of concept that lets you say, yeah, I've got a company and it's worth a lot, and it's worth more than nothing now, and it's likely to be worth a lot more with these specific steps. But each of those steps, as you go from discovery to development, stages of development, preclinical to through clinical, safety, then into efficacy, then into pre-market, each one of these, you need a whole new set of skills. You're not looking for, again, the same term, you're not looking for commodity labor. You're looking for people with specific regulatory knowledge, people with specific clinical development knowledge. You know, one of the things I do in my day job is I'm constantly assessing and trying to handicap the likelihood of outcome of clinical trials. And, you know, it's like you look at, okay, what disease they're going after, how are they going to populate it, what is the effect that you think the drug will have, what's the variability of that effect, what's the reliability of the measurements specific. You can have a drug that works, but you don't have a great way to assess it in a period of time that's reasonable for clinical trial. And given those parameters, biostatistically, what's the number of subjects you need to populate that trial? Well, where do you get those subjects? Are they out there using drugs now? Do you have to find a group of people that are failing the drugs that exist now that want to enter clinical trials? Are they geographically dispersed? Are they geographically concentrated? Can you go to a single center of excellence, have them lead your trial, and be able to get sufficient data that you can take it from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3? These are really, really technical aspects of just a further down the line part of drug development. You may be completely, incredibly knowledgeable about bench work, You may have self-taught yourself a tremendous amount of epidemiology, biostatistics, things of that sort. But when it comes to the times of the nuts and bolts of writing up a consent form and getting it out and training a center to actually do the trial well, so that the people that review the thousands of page documents, we present the data that's regulatory, will say, oh yes, these data are valid. Very, very difficult. And this is not the kind of talent you typically have at the founder level. So every one of you is going to start a company, and you're taking 5 years from now, you got to keep looking for new people that do new skills, some of which you'll be able to assess and some of which you won't. Now you may decide at some point to hand these executive functions over to somebody else. You know, say, okay, I need an experienced biotech CEO to take over. But on the same hand, you should have the ability to decide when that is. It should not be when you run out of knowing how to do things. Okay? So it's a tough field, but if you want to learn the entrepreneurship process, what better field to study than the toughest one? Okay? So if you ultimately want to go out and, tutor Spanish, that's fine. You probably don't need that to run a biotech company, but there are aspects of that's a company too. So let's give you the tools to do that. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what we're doing. Now, you decided to turn down medical school. You've decided to turn down McKinsey's offer. You've got job offers from Goldman Sachs and I don't know, choose the biotech company you want, it's Biogen, and you want to go out on your own. You've got an idea, you want to run with it, and you're going to wait. You told your friends and family, you've opened up a little bank account for your business, and okay, what are the specific steps that we're doing? And now we're going to go away from Columbia University, and we're going to go back to vocational school. This is real, just practical, grinded out stuff we're going to talk about now. The way I break it down is there's 4 areas that you have to organize in your mind from the time you decide to start your company. And you're going to be pushing these things together in parallel to keep things going. Because if you do 1 or 2 in the absence of the other 2, it's not, you're going to stall. And you're constantly going to be running back to the thing that's being underdeveloped. So those 4 areas are communication and identity. I lump these together. You're forming an entity, you're figuring out how to talk about it, and you're papering it over legally. Number 2, we'll go from the bottom up here. You can identify what it is that's special about what you're doing that's protected. Because, again, you've got to figure out very quickly where your price comes from and what the nature of that pricing is. And is this a super profitable? Is this a premium product with a lot of margin? And you're going to need that margin in order to grow the company? Or is this a commodity type thing that has to be exploited differently? Number 3, funding. How's this going to be paid for now and in the future? With particular emphasis on what happens when the money runs out and what am I going to use as proof that it's worth more now than it was before. Because that's the way you can think. If I bet 5 companies in a day, it could be, the vision could be amazing, the product could be amazing, the people, the team could be just blow you out of the water impressive. On the same hand, I'm not going to write a check now unless I can handicap to a high degree of certainty that when they need to raise money again, it's going to be worth a lot more. Because if it's not, then I'll wait till then. I'll let somebody else shoulder the burden. So you've got to be able to quantify it as best you can within the context of unquantifiable stuff. This is not Warren Buffett type investing. All the credit in the world to Warren Buffett. He's an amazing investor and a real scholar of finance. But what he does, under the broad rubric of value investing, is really one version of putting a value on the lottery ticket after you know what the winning lottery numbers are. It's like you've got the numbers there, you just plug them into the equations in a relatively narrow band. But what we're doing, the band, there's no band, it's just all over the place. So you need to be able to model to the best you can. And very important, what are your steps of proof of concept? What is it that tells us that this idea is actually a good business? And the business plan that you're presenting to me as an investor, and to the classmates of yours that you want to join you and forgo their own jobs with McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and go to med school. You know, what are those proofs of concept that show? Here's why this idea is exciting and why it's likely to work. You know, in biotech, those proofs of concept normally come down to data. The data may be yours, it may be yours only. It could be a simple. It could be a in vitro experiment, cell cultures, things of that sort. It could be your data combined with someone else's data, where they say, okay, they've had their own proof of concept data. You take it out of a paper in Nature or Science or Cell. You say, well, we're investigating the same thing, doing it in a different way, and here's why ours is better. That's fine. It could be a clinical trial, it could be animal data, all sorts of ways that you need to be able to tell everybody, here's how I'm gauging success. If it's a business, if you're opening a restaurant, you're gauging success by, here's the percentage of the seats that are occupied, here's how much money we're making versus how much money we're spending. Starting a restaurant is very, very hard. It's one of those things that people say, why did I do this? It's extremely, extremely hard. This is hard. Because the metrics that you're using, you hear the term KPI, key performance indices, or KPM, key performance metrics. People say, well, what's your KPI? What are you measuring? What's the clock that you look at each day by which you assess your progress? Because it's one of the first things I ask, because I'm investing in a company. I want to know, okay, if you said this is the gauge by which we gauge success, I'm going to call you up every 3 months and say, okay, how are we doing with that? Whether it's cost of customer acquisition in a healthcare, health data, telehealth type company, if it's amount of traffic on a website, whatever it is, there's got to be something by which you do it. Okay? So these are the 4 tracks that you're going to be running through your mind all the time. And don't worry if you can't read this, but I've become a fan of mapping things. I find it just helps me. So this is kind of, you wake up in the morning and somewhere along with, I need to eat breakfast, I need to brush my teeth and eat breakfast, you start running this through your head. So, defining and protecting what's proprietary, your funding strategy, your proof of concept, identity and communication, this is what we're going to focus on first. Okay? How am I doing with all this stuff? Now, you can't just do one. You've got to do these all at the same time.
Yeah, sorry, you keep on referring to premium and commodity. How do you distinguish between the two?
Okay, we will get to that.
Okay.
Okay? It really comes down to when the commodity is where the market hands you a price.
Okay.
Based on, half of you probably take intro economics, supply curve, demand curve, they cross, that's where the price is, an equilibrium price, assuming ease of access into and out of the marketplace, and that any excess profits will get arbitraged away down to an equilibrium price. If you charge more than that, no one's going to buy from you. If you charge less, you're going to lose money. That's a commodity price. So premium is where your product is valued in such a way, and the supply of people that can supply it is constrained, so that there's a scarcity value and you get a price premium. Okay? So that's a it's deeper than that. That's it's you absolutely have to understand that concept when you're going into this. Okay, so this is kind of what you do. Yeah. So let's start digging into that kind of weird map I just did. Let's go to that upper right-hand corner and start talking about the nuts and bolts of starting your company and how you talk about it, how you communicate it. Now, this may seem trivial. Like I'm saying, how do you talk? It's like, you all wouldn't be here unless you knew how to speak articulately and convincingly. However, like in a lot of things, there is a scaffold. You want to go in with a scaffold or a script or at least an organization to what you're doing, so that you can choose to deviate from it. But if you just go in and you start talking, you're going to waste a lot of your time and you're not going to do it very well. So, within the rubric of business communication, here's kind of just a set of things that you learn. One is you learn to be concise, and you learn to get to the point quickly. So you're starting a company, you're going to give it a name. More importantly, you got to be able to describe it fast. What are you doing? You know, it's like a lot of the descriptions of companies that you guys sent to me. I was reading through it, and I was, what do I get from reading through your descriptions? Wow, this person's given a lot of thought to this. Wow, they communicate pretty well. And wow, I'm on the third paragraph, I still don't know what they do. So you gotta come up with a quick way of describing something. Better, cheaper, solution to something there's no solution, just very quick. Get to the problem or get to your idea. You may want to have two. You may want to have a description for someone with the technical vocabulary and someone with the non-technical vocabulary. Okay. You could have something. COVID gave us opportunities to do tremendous amount of stuff. Home COVID testing, 3 words. Cheap home COVID testing, 4 words. No one's going to argue with you. That's terrific. There's a few more that are a little tougher. It's like non-toxic chemotherapy. That's a good one. Cure for X. Various ways, just very quickly, zero in on what you're doing. Next, your elevator pitch, which we're going to spend a lot of time on. Because one, it's an important part of the process of this very early entrepreneurship stage. The pitching. And this is not Shark Tank performative stuff. This is how to most effectively get the most information to the people that need it quickly and move on to the more in-depth parts of your conversation. Business planning, and then the last thing that we're going to spend a little time on, it's not normally thought of this way, but accounting. It is a proprietary language of business. And if you're going to be effective and, more equally importantly, not exploit it, you need to be comfortable with accounting. It's not difficult. There's a beauty to basics of accounting. You're rolling your eyes. Who's this guy saying there's a beauty to accounting? But accounting, there is. It's a self-equilibrating, self-correcting, built-in quality assurance. Done correctly, accounting is a wonderful language. Accounting is the business what the periodic table is to chemistry. It's a great thing, and we're going to talk about that some more. In the beginning, you've got to be able to get conversations started. And you've got to be able to narrow down the people you want to spend your time talking to. Because if you are starting your own company, if your career is not any of those other things that is pushing your company, you're going to be talking about your company all the time. And you want to do it well. You want to maximize the probability that anybody that may want to work with you in whatever capacity gets drawn in quickly. Equally important, you don't want to waste a lot of time going into details about your company to someone who really doesn't care. And I don't mean like turning people off and that kind of thing. I just mean some people in your life are going to be there for reasons other than the success of your company. And it's important to triage your time with those people away from talking about the nuts and bolts of your business plan. So how do we do it? Now, in the past, I dedicated a class session to having people come in and do pitches. Untrained, unsuggested, just purely intuitive. I say, give me an idea. I would say, pitch a cheap self-serve frozen yogurt place to you. Just get up and do it. And, just using your own instincts. And what I usually got were extremely good, excellent descriptions of what the idea was. Put out, I was always amazed every year that people would just very quickly figure out what the genesis, what the germ of the idea was, and describe it to a T. Problem is, that's a great description of an idea, it's not a good pitch. So what you need to do, again, when I say, how to communicate your company. I don't mean to rob you of your creativity, because there's an awful lot of opportunity to be creative and, use your own, intelligence, your own personality, your own way of doing it. On the same hand, there are a bunch of things you want to hit. And this is one kind of tried and true way of doing your pitch. And you can make it longer and shorter, you can experiment within it. But the key thing, the problem most people do, is they just go right to the idea with nothing to hang it on to. So what you want to do is you want to arrive at an agreement quickly with your listener that there's a problem to be solved. So lead with your problem. And I live in the healthcare world. The healthcare world is a theme park of problems to solve. It is so screwed up. So usually I have one or two people that go from this class to med school. And I always recommend the same thing. Start logging the problems that you see, because you're going to see them starting day one. And then you may just intuitively, as you multitask in your brain in the background, start thinking about solutions to these problems, and you may find that a business grows out of it. One of my students in the past came back later on to present. He and a couple of his colleagues, back when there was a crisis in Africa with Ebola. Ebola is a god-awful infectious disease. Very rapidly fatal, extremely communicative. And people that treat Ebola, essentially they have to douse themselves in bleach to protect themselves. It's really, it's different from COVID, but same kind of considerations, only it's more infectious and more rapidly fatal. So you got these people wearing essentially hazmat suits. Hazmat suits are covered in bleach. The problem with bleach is it, as my chemistry people here know, like every other liquid, evaporates. And it's invisible, so you don't know when the bleach is active and when it's not. This group of Columbia undergrads, they came up with a dye that you mix the bleach with, and when the dye disappears, the bleach needs to be reapplied. Isn't that a beautiful, simple idea? They were Forbes 30 under 30 of that idea. So it's a tiny little micro problem that was identified within the very obscure management of a single, thankfully very rare disease. And they identified the problem, came up with a solution, implemented the solution, and it is beautiful. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now, they're not building a $1 trillion company from it, but who cares? We'll worry about keeping score on that later on. So the ability to communicate is, now along the way, they had to figure out a way to talk about it. So what's the problem? Bleach evaporates. That's the problem. So why do I care about bleach evaporating? You need to cover Ebola responded with bleach, and bleach evaporates, so we don't know when. Okay? There's the problem. Is anyone going to disagree that that's a problem? No. So here you are, you start off talking against somebody. They're neutral to you. First thing you do is you come to agreement that there's a problem, and it would be a good idea to fix that problem. Simple. But it's really the way you want to lead. Then you flesh it out a little bit. Who's suffering from this problem? Okay, well, healthcare workers are dying because the bleach runs out, and they get Ebola. It's an easy story to tell. Okay, so you've got a problem, and you've got a picture now. You've gone from abstract to something a little bit more concrete. The person you're talking about is imagining the problem. In healthcare, it's a matter of convincing someone that someone is suffering, or someone is dying from something. It's a pretty easy sell. But define it. Who are they? These are healthcare workers. These are volunteers. These are public health people. They're healthy. They go in. They're trying to do their job, and the job kills them. And we want to protect them. Okay? You got me. You had me maybe not a hello, but we've now. Okay, I'm waiting. I'm literally telling you, how do we fix it? Because you're coming to me with the solution. here's my idea. We stain the bleach. When the color disappears, it needs to be reapplied. Very cool. Yeah, it's all right, I'm in. Now I'm not investing yet because I gotta figure out from idea to implementation if this is gonna work. So what's the first thing I wanna know? I wanna know something about you. Why am I gonna trust you to implement this idea to make me, because I'm just a venture capitalist and I'm, all I care about is making money. I don't want to save the world. Actually, I do, but it's like you just assume. Let's talk financially. Why you? Well, and you've got to list some criteria that tell me why you are a good person at this stage to be captaining this ship. It could be something like, we're the ones that have the patent. That's a good one. It could be that I've worked in public health for X number of years. I've done 3 startups in it. I've done 4 product rollouts. And I have a team that we can just plug this right into and make it happen. That's great if it's true. But it could be nothing, nothing more than it's our idea and we have the content. Maybe we vetted 3 or 4 dozen of them and we only found one that works. And then finally, let's make it a little bit more digital. Give me a number. Give me something to hang my hat on to give me an idea for how big an opportunity this is. Because if you're convincing someone to give up their career to do this with you, and it's a big problem, the problem needs to be solved, but solving the problem is a one-time self-limited thing that maybe we'll get an award for, maybe we'll make a certain amount of money from it, maybe we can use a springboard for a company to do other things. Or it's an idea that every year there's millions of new people suffering from this. And it's essentially an annuity that generates the same high level of profit again and again and again and again. Give me something to go on. If it's Ebola, how many people are exposed to Ebola in a given period of time? And how often do Ebola outbreaks happen? Give me something, give me historical. Give me stuff that I can vet. Remember data integrity. Don't make something up. Don't compare it to, Pfizer has made X hundreds of billions of dollars on its COVID vaccine. That's an infectious disease. This is an infectious disease. Those ideas don't go very far. But if you say, okay, let's build the model. Give me a very brief model. Number of people affected, how badly they're affected, and how often it comes along. And then maybe I can, add my own knowledge of the cost of proprietary chemical-based products and what the size of the market is. Okay? Remember, this is a first conversation. This is a conversation to lead to a second conversation. You don't have to kill them with detail. You really want to define an agreement that there's a problem, paint a picture in the listener's head as to who's affected, tell them what your idea is, and then flesh out the idea a little bit after saying something about yourself. Validate yourself a little bit, and then give them a number to hang on. There should be minimal numbers the first 4, and you keep it down. Try to keep it to one really good number. And the challenge is finding what that is. Okay? This is tattoo on your arm type stuff. If you're going to become an entrepreneur. Because the pitch in one way or the other becomes the template for a lot of your communication. It could be the formal pitch where you're talking about where that fits in. It could be informal conversations of what the company does. It could be, and it is, this is the basis by which you write your business plan. Because the business plan, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation, whether it's a 70 or 80 page double-spaced type document with numbered copies with confidential on it that you hand out to people and then take back from them. Whatever it is, you need to hit all of these and you need to hit it convincingly. And if you're trying to organize your discussion, organize it around this. Because this really is it's one way to really draw in collaborators, regardless of what kind of collaborators. Okay? Now, this isn't to say that you can't come up with your own method. Please do. But I want you to have something to start with. Okay, now where does this fit? Get back to one of my little maps. Can the people in the back see this? No? Okay. Well, there's a script that we go through, and I'll help your vision here. You come up with a company, first thing you want to do is give it a name. Why do you want to give it a name? Seems like a trivial exercise. You do not want your life's project to be misinterpreted as a hobby. You want it to be able, and you also, if you talk about your project to 2 or 3 people and they meet each other, you want to make it easy for them to discuss it. And the less precisely you name it, the more easy it is to misconstrue it. So give it a name. It doesn't have to be a permanent name. It's not like putting a name on a birth certificate. Yeah, but it's important to do that. Don't let anybody think that your entrepreneurial venture is a hobby. You take it very seriously. Then you go into your 3 to 6 word description. Okay? Say a dye to identify evaporating bleach. It is non-toxic chemotherapy. It's something that needs to be injected that you can give by a pill. It is, convince yourself how to quickly describe what it is that you do. I've been working on automating the in vitro fertilization process. It's my own work. And they say, well, what is it you do? I say, it's an IVF lab in a box. And immediately, anybody that knows the IVF industry just nods. Know exactly what we're talking about. It's a doctor on a chip. It's telemedicine for genetic counseling. I say something, it's immediately get an idea what it is. And this is a key pivot point in your business communication. Because here's where you're triaging your time to those people who matter the most to you, for business sense. Okay? One of these people may veer off and become a spouse or something. But we're talking about corralling the people that you talk to about your business. So you're going to look for 1 or 2 signals. I'm interested, I'm not interested. Yeah, it's great, change the subject, look off, discuss something else. That doesn't mean you never talk to them, you just find something else to talk about. Because all of you, and I know because you've described who you are to me, all of you are very multifaceted, and have a lot of interesting stuff about you. Your potential as entrepreneurs is only one of them. But this group doesn't really care. It's not going to be a group that's going to be effective for either of you, a good use of your time interacting on that topic. So we're off entrepreneurship. And the rest of them tell me more, cool, wow, that sounds interesting. They'll lean in, they'll sit down, they'll offer you a chair, they'll offer to buy you a drink, or whatever. There's plenty of people that are going to want to hear more. And that's when you pivot into your pitch. Tell me about it. Okay? What do you do? Hi, I'm so-and-so. You sit down on an airplane. Frankly, when I sit down on an airplane, I put headphones on. I don't want to talk to anybody. But lots of people like to talk to people on airplanes. Eventually said, what do you do? I'm starting a company. I'm a founder. Yeah, I've got this project I'm working on. I'm an entrepreneur. I don't love when people call themselves an entrepreneur. It sounds kind of self-aggrandizing. But anyway, so you get to.
What's better?
Depends on who you're talking to, your own way of presenting it.
To you, what's better?
An entrepreneur?
When somebody describes themselves as an entrepreneur?
Started a company.
Okay.
It's more precise. Entrepreneur could be someone who started 10 companies, has exits in 6 different verticals, has taken 4 companies public, and is, you call us an entrepreneur. It could be Richard Branson, or it could be someone that's, working on, noiseless Velcro in their basement. So it's just too imprecise. Say, I'm starting a company. It's very precise. And it's also an invitation to have them say, tell me about it. Those are gold to a founder's ears. Tell me about it. And then you go right in. You go to your pitch. You say, healthcare workers dying in Africa from Ebola. You know what I fix it? Yeah. Great. Tell me more. And you go in, and you settle on a common vision as to what the problem is, what your idea is, who you are, and you kind of give them an opt-out. Essentially, the illustrating number, that's kind of an opt-in, opt-out, because it could be so huge a thing that the potential small investor, collaborator, funder, business partner, whatever, it's just not right sized for them. Or it could be right in their sweet spot. So you want to kind of give them that idea, give them the choice. Because you may be, because they're sitting here, how interested am I in this? They may be interested to the point they want to keep talking about it, which is gold. If you have someone experienced in the marketplace that wants to give advice or something, take it. You may decide 1 or 2 meetings down it's not worth it. But by all means, talk to people and talk about talking. But that last number is just you're trying to start to learn about something about them. And they're going to vote by how much time they want to put into it as to how important it is. And you're going to have this conversation over and over and over again. And you give your pitch, and the questions will come back, a bit of a conversation. And then you get to the how do I follow up. So this whole thing could be 5 minutes. And this is a script you need to be really good at. And you're going to make it your own. It's going to all be filtered through your own vocabulary, your own ease of comfort with other people, the way you want to talk about facts versus vision versus whatever. You make it yours. This is your big cup and 16 handles. Fill it with whatever you want, but the structure there is the cup. So that's what you're working with, okay? And that metaphor just came up and will probably never be used again. Anyway, so you meet someone, let them know you're starting a company, again, describe it briefly. If they want to hear about it, there's your pitch. That's your flow chart there. How do the pitch talk? How do I follow up? And then you get into the kind of more broad, how you're going to present your business plan. How is it that in a formal setting, where the purpose is really laying out the steps that you are going to take as a founder to make this company work, how are you going to do that? Is it going to be, again, first business I started, it was an 80-page, double-spaced document that I would send people. And this was before you could email a document that big, so it was literally typed and bound and the whole bit, delivered with fanfare, spell checked, obviously, the whole bit. It could be a brief PowerPoint. It could be that you want to do it in person, or by in person now, by Zoom or whatever. But you decide what it is about what's the best means to bring this person in as a partner in whatever way. And there's lots of different ways that somebody can partner with you. But surrounding yourself with people who care, PwC, is your primary job early on the communication identity stage. Okay? You can't do it all by yourself. When you get to the business plan, I break down one part of it, this is what we talked about before. Here's the very specific stuff to the problem you're solving and the means by which you solve it. If it's the problem you're solving is, here's the disease, here's the number of people, here's how they suffer, here's the time frame, here's how they get it. And whether you're using a preventive strategy, a delivery strategy, a therapeutic strategy, a device strategy, there's a proprietary vocabulary that you're going to be dealing with. And then there's the general stuff that you have to hit no matter what. And that's what I get to here, which is, again, where's the price come from? And this is important for a lot of reasons. One is, it is the acid test by which business plans succeed or fail. You have to correctly identify what that is in order for it to work. It's also, it's one of the best disciplines to make you understand the marketplace you're entering. And this is key. When I first put this course together, I had a couple conversations with friends who had been wildly successful in entrepreneurial ventures. And we just sort of said, okay, looking at it organically. This isn't the business class. It's not a science class. It's kind of, if anything, this is a language class. We're teaching a vocabulary. We're teaching a fluency. And one of the questions you want to, well, how do you want to drill down into learning about something that's out of the marketplace? And they all came up with the same thing. So understand the pricing. Understand where the price comes from. Because that's the means by which you're gonna make yourself disciplined about your assumptions, that you're gonna prepare yourself for a tremendous number of answers to other questions. When you think about the way you finance a company, if something's a commodity company, you come down, you get market pricing, it's a commodity model. You're selling sand, you're selling cement, you're selling corn, you're selling overly sweet frozen yogurt. Something where it's, you can go to you, they can go somewhere else. They're not going to pay more than a certain amount. The pricing is what the price is. Then how do you finance that company? You finance it by making a little bit of profit many, many, many times. How do you become innovative in a market like that? You figure out how to deliver it cheaper. Right? Innovation usually doesn't revolve around something that's better and more expensive in a commodity marketplace. Because you may see the differentiation, but the market may not. So if you want to make a better portable phone, okay? And you say, my phone is better because of whatever. It comes out of sourced materials from this way or something like that. And you say, okay, I'm going to do it, and that's going to make me compete with Androids and compete with the iPhone. The legitimate question is, no one's going to care. It's the so what test. Go to Dwayne Reed down the street here. There's like frozen yogurt place. There's a Dwayne Reed like every block. Go to Dwayne Reed, go to the display where they have toothpaste. Huh? And you say, okay, I've got a new way of making toothpaste. It's vegan, it's kosher, it's organically sourced, it is safe for dogs. They have all these differentiating factors. And I'm going to charge $12 a tube for it because I'm different and that different is better. So you're making an assumption here on your business plan that you have autonomous pricing. That you are making something that's so unique that you can achieve what the economists call an economic rent, an extra amount of money just for being what you are. It's like when you buy art. If you buy a Picasso, it is all economic rent. It's whatever the buyer and the seller decide they want to spend millions of dollars to exchange that piece of art. Then you go into the mall art store, where they have pictures in the mall and they sell art. And it's like art on the square foot. It's kind of, it's colorful, and it may be cartoons, it may be magical, it may be dogs playing poker, whatever. But there's a commodity pricing to that. It's all art. But it's, the marketplace perceives one thing versus another. No one's going to care that your toothpaste is kosher and vegan and organically sourced and maybe has a fun color and maybe flashes lights on it. It's stuff you put on your toothbrush and you brush with. This is it's like a basic slice of pizza. So you got to make sure that you know where you are there. So we kind of define three models. There's what I call the demand curve model, or a monopoly price. And you're the only one that does it. You're it. If you convince the world that what you do and you're the only person that sells it, then you decide where on the demand curve that you want to live. Again, I got a handful of people with economics backgrounds. Draw a graph. Okay, how's this axis label? Which one's dollars, which one's here? No, I had some financial economics major here.
This one's dollar, yeah, this one's.
Okay, quantity dollars. Price, how much you sell. Higher price, you sell fewer. It's pretty simple. Supply curve is the opposite. You know, when the price is higher, people come into the marketplace and all of a sudden they supply more. They may not sell more, but they put them in the marketplace. But in a pure monopoly, when you're the only one making something, it's 2009 and Apple invented the iPad. It's the only one. You know what happened? There is no supply. There's just a demand. Now, you don't know what it is, you do some market research. But you decide you can sit wherever you want on this demand curve. You want to make the iPad $100,000 each? You live up here. Maybe you'll sell 2 of them. But maybe you don't care. Maybe your cost of production is such that that's the way to do it. You know, you have these boutique, artisanal made electronics that somebody sits over a bench for weeks and makes them, and they'll get that much money for them. You know, terrific. That's your decision as an entrepreneur. But if you've got truly demand curve model, i.e. monopolistic pricing, it's up to you how much you charge. Now you're not going to control the ultimate revenue because there's going to be a certain number that will buy for every price you have. And you see that. Yeah, I don't have any musicians here, but you remember price a guitar? You know, an electric guitar, there's like a million different versions of a Fender Telecaster, including ones that are hand-built from 200-year-old pine, from reclaimed wood, from, you know, incredible stuff, from craftsmen that sell for thousands of dollars. And then there's Fender Telecasters that come out of a factory that are machine-made in low cost of labor countries that may cost 1/10 that. They're all Fender Telecasters. And within that market, it's a complex marketing ecosystem for a single product. But it's, you know, the sum total of that is just a bunch of different commodity model, oligopolistic competitions and demand curves. So the demand curve model is simple, it's a monopoly. Right now, think of Tesla. You know, Tesla seems to momentarily have something close to it now. You know, they can put out a couple different types of cars, command a pricing structure different than what Chevy and Ford and Mercedes and Audi and seem to have settled in over decades. Most of these are not sustainable, as we talked about last time. But that's sort of a monopoly model. People don't, a lot of people that go out to buy Teslas, go out to buy Teslas. They don't go out to buy cars. And there's a difference. It's magical when you can command that type of market identity. Now, more common is this middle model. It's a market pricing model we call, I give the clumsy name of oligopolistic competition. And this is your toothpaste model. You know, what happens in oligopolistic competition, you've got Procter & Gamble and General Foods and Nabisco and whoever makes all these consumer brands, and I know nothing about consumer brands. But they make lots and lots of everything. And they put brands on them. Think of breakfast cereal. We all know what Cheerios are. You know, we all know what Wheaties are. You know, Chex and things of that sort. They're different. So when you go to the store, you go, I'm going to buy breakfast cereal, or I'm going for my box of cereals, whatever. And you go and you go to the supermarket, and there's an aisle a mile wide with nothing but breakfast cereal. All of which has a different name, has a different reason to be, whether it's sweet, whether it's healthy, whether it protects against heart disease, which I still can't believe they get away with that on the label. Somebody does. And you've got all these different breakfast cereals attempting to make themselves Teslas instead of cars. So they want you to go to the supermarket just to get that box of Captain Crunch. Okay, you'll have nothing but, you'll go to 3 different supermarkets just to get Captain Crunch because you don't want anything else. Does Captain Crunch still exist? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to be sure. So that's the oligopolistic competition model. The characteristics of that model tend to be that they compete on everything within a very narrow band of price. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to, instead of having the enormous demand curve of cereal, they want a special demand curve for Captain Crunch. loyal people that'll go from second to third supermarkets to get what they want and be willing to pay a little bit more for it, right? So cars, it's toothpaste, it's, you name it. And it's important that you, when you're building your business plan, define what kind of business you're making. Remember we talked about up until 10 minutes ago, saying know where your price comes from. Now we're stratifying that into specific polar extremes of pricing within a spectrum. So is this a monopoly? If it is, power to you. One of the reasons the biotech industry is so attractive is that by virtue of the patents that you get, as well as these devious patent extension strategies that companies have, they maintain that monopolistic demand curve based pricing model for sometimes decades, very long period of time. And frankly, they need that in order to justify the uncertainty of that long product development stage. If you're presenting a biotech business plan to me, and I don't think that you're going to have control over your pricing, then it becomes a much less attractive investment, purely from a dollars and cents standpoint. The models that we build out, where we try to come up with a present value for something that's going to make a lot of money in the future, are very drastically altered by that. You may have, if you follow the industry closely, you may have seen that there's been a major move protesting one of the government's plans, one of the making its way through the legislature, to allow for negotiation of drug prices with Medicare. And we'll get into drug pricing, drug reimbursement later. But anytime this comes up, you see this extreme reaction from the industry, which is, because it's really an existential issue. If a law like that gets passed, it won't. But it really goes to the heart of the most basic assumptions of your business plan, which is your control over the pricing. Okay? So when you're presenting your business plan, you've got that second meeting after the pitch time, the time when you gave the pitch, or the plane lands and the person next to you, who just so happens to be a partner at a venture firm, says, listen, why don't we have a drink? Let's have dinner. Let's sit down, I want to hear more. And this is what they want to hear. And one of the things they're going to be figuring out right away is this. You can't lose that. And I tend to stress to people moving into the business arena from the technical area, get used to having that conversation quickly. Because that's the one that you probably have not had with yourself. That's a discipline we don't teach in biochemistry, bioengineering, physics, all those areas. And it's one that frankly, intellectually it's not that challenging, but it is a core existential assumption about starting a new business. You get pricing wrong, your business is not going to go where you want it to. Okay? Good question.
So where would you classify a place like Trader Joe's?
Okay, excellent question. Well, I'll ask you, is Trader Joe's a market or is it a specialized market?
I would say market because you can get anything that you need at Trader Joe's anywhere else, it just has the Trader Joe's label.
Okay,
With a
when you
slight-
go out to buy food, do you specifically go to Trader Joe's? Or if they opened up a, Market X, a block from your house, and Trader Joe's was 5 blocks away and you could walk, would you go up to Trader Joe's or would you walk to Market X?
Market X, because Trader Joe's always has a line out the door.
Okay, well, there you have it. So your opinion multiplied by the total addressable market of people that might shop at Trader Joe's answers that question. So now when you are batting these things around, when Amazon was trying to decide whether to buy Whole Foods, ways back, they were having these very same questions. They were addressing it. So I don't know if they did market research. They may have pulled 1,000 of you aside. So can I ask you a question? Where do you buy your food? Where do you live? How much shopping do you do? How much of you shopping? How much cooking do you do with yourself? Do you And, you know, they really try to tease it out. Marketing is, you know, we're gonna give one half of one lecture to marketing. You know, there are obviously people that get PhDs in marketing, figuring out really just how to ask those specific questions. So a Trader Joe's may be one place, a Stop and Shop may be somewhere else. What do you mean? They both sell food. They both have big markets. You can get almost any type of food you want in each one. However, the nature of the specifics that Trader Joe's does versus what Stop and Shop does. You go to a Stop and Shop, the amount of aisle space given to fresh food is very small. You know, the amount of space given to things with very long shelf life is very high. That way Stop and Shop can have a very different cost of supplying themselves and scale up in a different way than Whole Foods will. And that requires, and that will appeal to a different type of customer. Now those customers are, you know, if I see people lined up outside my store to pay my higher price, that tells me I should be building another store or a bigger store, where I should be using that excess profitability to pour that money back into the business. When we talk about finance, when we talk about finally, when a biotech company makes money, what to do with it, it's really, so there are only a certain number of things you can do with your profits. You can distribute it to the owners. It's called a dividend. You can reinvest it back into the company. Or you could buy back some of your company. You know, it's like when you hear about companies doing share buybacks. They're essentially saying, well, we think our company's worth a lot more. These are publicly traded companies. We think it's worth a lot more than the market's giving us credit for. We're going to go out and buy our company back. You see things like that. So it's a limited number. You don't want to just let the money just keep piling up in the bank endlessly. And some companies do. Like Apple's bank balance is absurd. You know, how much cash they have. But on the same hand, at some point, the shareholders of the company, or the owners of the company, want the money to be doing something other than sitting there. So if you're Whole Foods or you're Trader Joe's, and every store has an enormous line out of it, and every store is profitable, and if the profit margins are sufficiently high, build more stores, which as far as I can tell is exactly what they do. If they were Stop and Shop, they wouldn't have that luxury. Okay? That's why it's important to figure out, okay, I'm going to start a new business. I'm going to start a food market. Because, and you decide there's a differentiating factor. I'm going to ask you, is this market that you're starting closer to Trader Joe's or is it closer to Stop and Shop? And you need to be able to answer that.
So for the purposes of this class, would we define Trader Joe's as a commodity model or oligopolistic competition?
I'd say it's oligopolistic competition bordering on trying to carve out its own little market. Yeah. If you have a group of people that do consumer marketing, and someone comes up and says something, well, we're going after the Trader Joe's customer, then from now, that's a monopoly. Yeah, they've got their own defined, loyal group of people. Now, monopolies can be very tenuous. If they're really based only on a replicable business plan, they won't last as monopolies. They will attract competition. Again, why does biotech not necessarily do that? Because the patents are. Question back.
No, that's interesting. Well, now that makes me envision it a little bit more as a spectrum versus separate entities, where you have on one side monopolistic, the other side the legal, or I'm sorry.
Oligopolistic competition.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, these are useful simplifications. Like anything in life is a continuum of definitions. You know, we try to be as precise as possible.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, you can be somewhat imprecise, but it's helpful. So this is the way I characterize it.
Is it helpful to say that if you are in the camp of the Ligo, that you are trying to find a space that is closer to monopoly, like those differentiators?
Might be. Depends on the specifics of your company. You may like competing.
Why?
You know, because maybe it expands the market. You got all these people that are advertising, wanting some of your market, bringing new people into the marketplace that otherwise wouldn't be there. And then they do a comparison. They say, no, your product's better than theirs. So if I've got a perfectly running car that I can manufacture cheaply, that people just love, the specifics of the design and nobody else can replicate, and other people try, and the aggregate amount of advertising going into buying my type of car goes up by 10x, but everybody keeps coming back to me about sell it, yeah, let's do it. I like that. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the legal entity that you put together when you start a business. And the important thing to recognize is this is one of those laws of thermodynamics that you can't ignore. Because if you start a business and you do nothing, you are de facto starting a certain legal entity. It may not be the way you want, okay? So you need to stare this particular checkbox off and make a decision. The decisions are pretty straightforward, but the fact that you have a business, you want to do a couple of things. You want to, again, the same way you give it a name, you want to make it a thing. You want to make it separate from you, because assuming you want to grow it, and you want to disperse the responsibility, disperse the authority, disperse the liability, that you want to make it bigger. So you need to take it away from you. And the question is, legally, and these are just arbitrary, passed down from centuries, legal ways of categorizing businesses. Now, if you do nothing, if you start a business by yourself, and you do nothing legally, you don't talk to lawyers, you don't fill any plans, you start charging people for something, getting paid, you are legally running a single proprietorship. So if you go on Craigslist, you say, I give piano lessons, and you go to people's houses and you teach piano, and they pay you whatever per hour, you actually have a legal entity. It's called a single proprietorship. If you and your best friend do it together, it's a simple partnership. Why does this matter? Well, what does it mean other than the title? Well, it comes down to personal responsibility and liability for injury or death and things like that, and taxes. So death and taxes, you can't get away from it. So you give piano lessons, it's a pretty low risk thing to do. You're not so much worried that someone's going to get injured and sue you for the piano lesson, unless you're a really hard driving piano teacher. But on the same hand, if you run up lots of debt running your piano, like if you start buying pianos and bringing them with you each time you give a lesson, and you rent cars and trailers to do that, you carved out your place. I teach you piano, and I also give you access to the best pianos in the world. It's kind of an odd business plan, but it's okay. If it works, terrific. But it has a whole new set of liabilities. You're bringing the piano in, somebody gets hurt carrying the piano, you get into a car accident with a trailer, pulling the piano. Okay, so you've got liabilities there. And regarding taxes, there's different tax rates for you as an individual versus company tax rates, business tax rates. And not only that, but there are certain ways that taxes can be applied twice for the same amount of money gets made, depending on how you're accounting for your business. So these are things that go into, okay, well, what kind of business do I want to make? Single proprietorship or partnership, it's income. It could be the same as a wage, it could be whatever tax rate you're in, that's what you taxed at. So whether you made your money working for Whole Foods, as your part-time job to make ends meet, or the money from, iteachpiano.com, which is what people hand you in cash, assuming you report it, which we assume you will, then the tax rate will be applied the same. Depending on how much money you make will determine what that tax rate is. Obviously, you make more and more money, the tax rate goes up. Now, as you start getting into company structures, things that you need to go to a lawyer for, or go online and download the specific document and figure out what agency needs to be sent to, so that you will be creating this new entity outside of you, or you and your partner, you start getting into different levels of company. There's something the most advanced, the ones with the most oversight, the most need for documentation, and the most legal input are corporations. The largest types of corporations are called C corporations. These are entities that are chartered and individual states that have complete separation between the company and the owners of the company. The liabilities and the obligations that the company, and this is a C Corp, the liabilities that the obligations that the company incurs are only the company's. They are not the shareholders. There is some amounts of liability and responsibility that the board of directors of the company may have. But the owners of the company, the stockholders of the company, the people whose connection to the company is only that they own it. They are not responsible unless they're things like negligence or criminality or investment. So it's a complete separation. Somebody walks into Whole Foods, slips on the floor, and breaks their leg. The company is liable for damages, but it's the company. You know, it's the lawyers may make noise about going and suing certain charities and things like that. That usually doesn't. It's usually not a legal basis for it. The taxation for C corporations is such that the corporation is taxed on their profits. So Merck or Pfizer or any big company, Apple Computer, they make a certain amount of profit and they will pay, in spite of the gymnastics that their accountants do, they will pay some percentage of that in taxes to the government. Now there's tax rate, we can talk forever about deductions and all that stuff. But the core does just know that the profits of the company are taxed. Now where the double taxation comes in is that if the company then takes retain the excess amount that they made, their profits, and they give some to their shareholders as a dividend. Now those profits were already taxed at the corporate level. I then get a check as a shareholder for Apple Computer for something. That dividend that I receive is also income for me on my personal account. So the already taxed profits is going to get taxed again on my personal income. Right? So in a C corporation, your owners are subject to double taxation. Here's what it is. Okay? And the way taxes work is it's an incredibly arcane process, but we just keep it simple. Now, in between a C corporation and a single proprietorship partnership are certain gradations of ways that you can characterize your company. One up from single proprietorship partnership is something called a limited liability company, or LLC. Now, when you hear the term shell company used, usually with suspicion of pejorative, it's typically an LLC. This is a separate company. It's not a corporation. It's not chartered by a state. It doesn't have some of the same requirements in terms of board oversight and reporting that C corporations do, but it is one that allows limits of liability as the name, and it allows for single taxation. So you miss some of the onerous things that come from that complete separation you have with the C corporation. So a lot of small companies will start off as LLCs. Now there are limitations to LLCs in terms of how you can raise money. You can't go out and sell pieces of your company quite as easily with LLCs. The ability to distribute equity, and when we talk about hiring and firing and compensation, we will hit on just how important it is to be able to finance your talent acquisition with pieces of your company. It's called getting stock options. You don't want to necessarily pay everybody to have cash. You want to give them an incentive to build towards the future of the company. And it's hopefully a more valuable means of compensation to them. But when you're doing an LLC, it's much more limited in your ability to do that. You're limited to the number of investors you can have. You're limited in the way that you can split up profits versus splitting up ownership. Now, an LLC is very similar to another type of corporation called an S corporation, which is a corporate structure, also chartered by the state like a C corp, also with segregated liability like a C corp, but with single taxation. You don't have double taxation in this. And like a limited liability company, you have some limitations, different limitations, but some limitations on the way you can dole out and distribute equity in the company. So depending on what your specific situation is, you may choose up front to become a partnership or a proprietorship, or you may choose to go all the way to the C corporation. You know, these are things that the lawyer will walk you through. Essentially just saying much more precisely and better what I just described. And these will be decisions, and you'll decide what's a good fit for you. Now, these are not things that are set in stone forever. You can change the nature of your ownership, it's not uncommon. But if you're looking at developing a large, ultimately extremely well, highly funded company, you may decide just to go right to a C Corp. Now, C Corps have certain artifacts. When people talk about starting corporations, it seems like they're all incorporated in Delaware. And Delaware seems to be the state that all the corporations are incorporated. The reason for that is the different states make it easier to have different rules regarding conflicts between shareholders and management. And if you are starting a company and you think that you're going to be running the company, you're going to be on the board of directors the whole time, you want to really captain that ship. You don't want some, ultimately go public and some activist shareholder group comes in, buys a block of stock and tries to tell you what to do. The state with the charter rules that are most friendly to you is typically Delaware. So there's an entire cottage industry of law firms having teeny offices in Delaware just to facilitate that particular marketplace artifact. So it's just a something you'll see if you start reading about these companies. Why are they all incorporated in Delaware? It just kind of came through historically. Now, there's a couple of other types of businesses that, okay, we talked about this. This is the basis of choosing which one. And we talked about the individuals, just to flip through the slides. Talked about these. Now, there's something called a benefit corporation. And this is a slide I added just a couple of years ago. It's a kind of designation in process. In the United States, the fiduciary duty, i.e. the legally defined duty of management and the board of directors of a corporation is to the shareholders of that corporation, period. That's who they answer to. So the presumption can be that everything has to be done to maximize profits. And that's, it's sort of, it sounds okay from the point of view of the owners until it doesn't. Like, let's say a company is maximizing their profits by legally polluting the hell out of a lake. Okay, for whatever reason, they can get away with it, but they're doing it anyway. And let's say there's pressure on the company, maybe from within, to stop polluting the lake, to keep producing it the same way, but not pollute. The board of directors and the management of the company may be pressured by certain shareholders, or they may just be evil, to say, no, it's a little cheaper to pollute the lake, so we're going to keep doing it until we legally don't have to. And you can get into a legal issue where they can say, well, it's our fiduciary duty. Now, that's an extreme case. You go to Europe, the boards of directors of companies in countries like Germany have to take into account the welfare of the workforce and society as a whole, including the environment. So, these are value judgments, there's political conversations around them, but to me, these are legitimate things to be talking about, and nobody wants a polluted lake. So, there's now a designation in a lot of different states, and it varies state to state, and it's still very imprecisely defined, called a benefit corporation. You charter as a benefit corporation, you are allowed, depending on the specific state, to incorporate other concerns other than shareholder value or pure fiduciary duty to shareholders in your managing the company. Now, you can say, well, isn't cleaning the lake good business? Well, it might be, but it might be something that you're prevented from doing because people are relying on a pure fiduciary duty type thing. So anyway, know about the benefit corporations. It's a work in progress. I think it's great, frankly, because corporate responsibility is important. Taking into account these various other actors within it. When it's not, it doesn't mean you're a nonprofit. You're still trying to make profits here. Nonprofits, you usually hear the terms 501c3, 501c4. These are specific designations. A 501c is a nonprofit company. They typically don't have to pay any, they get to pay less tax. They have different regulatory requirements, but they definitely have regulatory requirements. The last time I looked, there's like 27 different type of 501cs. 501c3 is almost all of them. If you start lobbying politically, you become a 501c4. And anyway, that's the spectrum of business forms. I've got about 20 seconds to wrap up, which won't give you a chance for questions. I'll be here afterwards. Next week, I'll send an email the next few days with assignments. Good class today. Chip Clark next week, which is so much better than sitting here listening to me. And I'll see you next week.